This is TWiT.
The FTC fined Facebook $5 billion in the wake of Cambridge Analytica and the company's violation of its previous obligations to the FTC and discipline from the FTC. Thoughts?
Seems like a pretty sweet deal for Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't have any liability for what's happened before. Looks like all the executives who are involved don't have an issue. They made how much last quarter? 16 billion-ish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have a consent decree to live under. There's a lot of conditions that exist within it. But it more than anything to me at a high level shows that the FTC is just inherently limited in terms of the tools it has under existing law. Something that you know, again, better than I, that because we don't have a strong federal data protection law, we don't have GDPR, we don't have a consumer privacy law, there's no proportionate fine that would say for every single user whose data was inappropriately leaked and you guys knew about it and then used by Cambridge Analytica or some other entity, then there's this degree of fine associated with it. And there's personal liability for the executive. I think they simply didn't have the legal tools. And this is the outcome of that. I think that the fact that the markets reacted the way that they did show that this, you know, people feel like this doesn't have any impact upon Facebook's fundamental business model, right? That, you know, and this is, I think, in the more this is a tough term, but the kind of their surveillance capitalism, right, is something that is not hindered by this. There's a whole bunch of different things they have to check off in terms of taking a step ahead of time, but I don't think it fundamentally changes that, and it won't. And the FTC, I don't think can, unless and until it's given different tools by Congress. And, you know, one of the stories of the last decade in Washington is that lobbying by the technology companies has been very successful in averting any high-level consumer privacy law. And, you know, I see that, you know, that people in the chat are talking about, you know, it's $5 billion, and it's true. That's a lot of money. It's a record. Mm-hmm. But in the context of their profits, it's not. It's not. And,
right. And I don't think the FTC thought that it was a lot in the context of their profits. We have, there's a New York Times piece discussing the give and take among the commissioners from the various political parties at the FTC who were in charge of deciding that this happened. And they concluded, the three Republican commissioners all concluded very pragmatically precisely what you just said. And they didn't use the terms that you did. We don't have the right legal tools. Pardon me. But I think that's what they meant. They asked, is the relief we would obtain through this settlement equal to or better than what we could reasonably obtain through litigation? If the answer had been no, it would have made sense to aggressively move forward in court. The answer, however, was yes. So, you know, they were working with the tools they had and deemed that this was the best solution.
Yep.
So,
it would be a backbreaking fine for a lot of companies. For these companies, you know, it's significant, but again, the reaction of investors suggests it's not enough to concern them. You know, the role of a fine is usually to create some kind of disincentive for bad behavior. And the scale of the fine is often proportionate to that disincentive. It's like transparency, you know, it should be proportionate to power. The reason we want presidents to disclose their tax returns when you do not expect private citizens to do so is because they have so much power. There are expectations once you enter positions of great responsibility that you will be more forthcoming so people can understand the decisions you make. They can understand the governance. They can understand the constraints. They can understand what's happening or not. And part of this consent decree is more disclosure. But the evidence I've seen suggests that consumers still, with all the disclosures that exist, still don't understand what they're giving away. And in many cases, they also have fatigue and a sense of hopelessness. Like my data? How can I control this? Particularly when you talk about passive consumption, you talk about data brokers, you talk about telecom companies and phones collecting location data through apps without you thinking about it, or collecting all the different points of data about your life and then it being pulled into a political file that's used to target ads, in a hyper personalized way. These aren't things that people feel for good reason they have a great deal of control over. And the idea with the data protection regulation that was put in over in Europe is to give people more control, to say, no, I don't want you to do that. You can't use it for these purposes. You can't use it at all, or I don't want you to collect that. And then the question is, should you be able to say that and still use the given service or not? And I think that's one we're really going to have to come to grips with. If we decide that these platforms are important enough, if we decide that they are like utilities, if there's, say, a monopoly where I don't have a great deal of choices for an ISP, or I really want to use the best search engine, or there's a whole lot of network lock-in for a gigantic social network, then is a given government going to say that here are the constraints for how and where the data can be collected or be used in order for someone to do that? And we're not there yet here. I think Europe has moved in that direction, but there's a reason that Facebook wasn't founded there to begin with, right? Because they already had laws that would have put a constraint upon, say, you taking a picture of someone and uploading it without their permission. Yeah. And there are some advantages to that in a digital world where infinite replication and scale means it's very hard for something to be forgotten once it goes out. And my sense is that we're all going to be grappling with this. And as we see more and more the kinds of harms that exist from your data exhaust and data shadow that follows you, we'll see more reactions that create different amounts of friction. New York State just constrained the disclosure of mugshots. It turns out there's a cottage industry around websites that basically blackmail people to get their picture removed because they don't want their picture from when they got arrested to be the first thing that shows up when someone searches for them. Now, I think that's actually not unreasonable, but I also think it's problematic to exempt it entirely from disclosure from media corporations, and to think about in turn for those media corporations to think, well, should we be creating the data shadow that hangs over someone's life or not? That's something which I think should be discussion in communities all the way down to the county and precinct level, all the way up to the federal level. Where should we be putting in friction for different kinds of data collection and for different kinds of use or reuse? And the problem I see is vast amounts of data collection already exist and much more is coming through the Internet of Things, right? Where different sensors are going to be collecting not just what you're reading, not just what you're searching for, not just what you're watching, not just what you're sharing, but where you are and when you were there. Yeah. And that is the kind of powerful data that we need to be really cautious about, because if that ends up being combined with an authoritarian state, that is a police state of a degree and tenor that's out of the worst dystopias, and we're really close to it. China has already gone a long way in that direction, and facial recognition by default combined with these things is going to create invisible barbed wire. And if we in more democratic states that value human rights don't start putting those values into the technologies and how they're governed now, I think we're going to be regretting it even more than we do at this moment.